Okay, Kurt, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you guys this morning. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
Great. All right. So again, my name is Kurt Gray. I have to acknowledge that I'm being recorded. Got that. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about me before we get started. So I worked for AAA for 29 years. I'm sure um, probably statistically, probably 8 out of 10 of you are AAA members. So I don't have to explain anything about AAA to most of you. But what you may not have known is we had a driver education and training department, which I was the director of for the last 17 years of my career. Ended up taking an early retirement during COVID and started a small consulting business where I still do the work, a lot of the work that I did at AAA, working with both um, seniors and companies that um, have employees that drive for business. I also have a home care agency called Seniors Helping Seniors, and we have a unique peer-to-peer model where we look for and hire older and more mature adults who can help seniors that need help with activities of daily living at home. So I'm a pretty busy person, um, uh, and in both of these businesses sort of keep me really engaged and busy. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about some key points, traffic safety as related to older drivers, high risk driving scenarios for seniors, places that they're statistically overrepresented in when it comes to crashes, um, common errors they make. We'll talk about driving skills evaluations, what it is, why it's important, and basically how they work. We'll talk about some safe driving resources, and I'll also provide a sheet at the end that I guess Gary or Liz can push out to you that will have links to the resources that we'll talk about. And then we'll talk about planning for driving retirement, which a lot of folks don't really think much about. But if we're lucky, and we live long enough, at some point you're going to outlive your ability to drive. So we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as some red flags that NHTSA has put out and some things that I've seen throughout my professional career. Now, here's the question. Here's the question I want you to respond to the chat in. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would like for you to rate yourself on how good a driver you think you are. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is obviously great or excellent. Um, one not so much, right? So let's just see where folks feel like they are regarding their skills as a driver.
So we've got 5, 9, 6, 7, 9, 7, 8, 8.
Okay. All right. Well, that's typical in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's not typical. I typically don't hear a lot of fives. Typically hear a lot of eights, nines, and even tens. Um, and I'll add myself to this, right? I'm probably on a really good day, I'm probably a seven, and that's on a good day. And I've had probably more professional training than anybody else on the call. The reality is most people are just average, right? Most people are about a five, right? I'm sure in reality we'll have a few fours, we'll have a few sixes, but we rarely have a lot of eights, nines, and tens. And that's because, driving is, it's just one of those things where you can't do everything right all the time. And there's so many factors and there's so much that goes into driving. It's such a complex thinking task that we often make mistakes and not even realize it, right? We often exceed the speed limit, don't realize it, often don't use our signal, we don't communicate well, and these are things that most people don't count as faults, and they're usually not a big deal, provided that nothing bad happens. Um, but the reality is, most people are just average, and oftentimes we use our lack of receiving tickets or our lack of being involved in a crash or an accident, as many people call it, as our sort of the gauge on which we feel like we're a good driver. But that's more luck than than anything else. Um, but we'll talk more about that in a second. So here we have Elizabeth on the left, and we have Judy on the right. And if we talk about who do we feel like is the safer driver, Elizabeth is 19, Judy's, 70. She's been driving for quite a while. Elizabeth's been driving for a couple of years. I think statistically, we would all know, right, that Judy on the right is the safer driver. There's nothing that replaces experience, and a new driver who's only been driving for a couple of years just doesn't have the experience to be considered a new driver. Now, I talk with a lot of parents of new drivers and teen drivers, and they tell me how wonderful their son or their daughter is at driving and how safe they are and how conscientious they are of things. And I say, well, if your daughter or your son who's been driving for 18 months is a good driver, what does what does that make you? Right? Who's been driving for 50 years, right? Those two things just aren't the same. On average, research shows that it takes 5 years to be as good as just an average driver. So teens just don't have the experience uh, to be what we would consider good drivers. The facts are that seniors are some of the safest drivers on the road, and they often do things to help reduce their risk that younger drivers don't, right? So one thing that we could say is that senior drivers tend to always wear their seatbelts. That's just they understand how the technology and the safety benefit just outweighs not wearing it. It's a no-brainer in a lot of ways. Two is that they are less likely to drive impaired, right? They don't drink and drive. They tend not to drive fast. They tend to observe speed limits, and sometimes some might argue that they drive too slow, right? So driving too slow is almost as dangerous as driving too fast, but they tend to stay well within speed limits. And the last thing is that they do what's called self-regulation. They self-restrict their driving due to safety concerns. And we'll talk more about self-regulation later, but if I asked, you know, folks on the call here, if they drive at night, most folks, probably 50% or more would say no. They tend not to want to drive at night if they can avoid it. Night driving is one of the first things that people tend to give up when we start self-regulating due to safety concerns. Now, the downside is that seniors are more likely to be injured or killed in a car crash simply due to age-related fragility. So as we get older, our bodies become more frail, and our ability to sustain the forces involved in a crash are just not there. So that's sort of definitely a downside to it. A few older driver facts. Crash risk per mile is higher for drivers who drive less. Crash risk per mile is higher for drivers who drive less, particularly those who travel less than 3,000 miles a year versus those who drive more. So when I hear people say, well, I don't drive much and I don't drive far, that doesn't mean your risk is lower. Obviously, the more you drive, the more exposure you have to it. But just as statistically, the less you drive from those that drive more, you're at greater risk. Driving on local roads is in fact riskier than highway driving. I hear it all the time. People like to give up on interstates, the Beltway, or they like back roads more because of usually it's trucks or speed or merging, right? But the fact is that those highways, those interstates and roads that have controlled access are, in fact, safer. And we usually have a discussion on this, and some folks tend to disagree, but I'll just tell you why, right? When you're on a road like any kind of interstate or highway that's controlled access, there's usually a barrier between you and oncoming traffic, right? So when you look on the Beltway, there's guardrails, there's ways to control and separate traffic. When you're on a back road or local roads, there is no barrier between traffic. The only thing separating you from oncoming traffic is some paint on the road. So a minute or an instance of distraction where a car drifts over into your lane, um, that's a bad situation, right? You end up having a head-on collision, which is the worst kind of collision you can have, and things get really bad. There's no shoulders on typically side or back roads. They're much more windy. There's lots of blind spots. On interstates, traffic is moving in the same direction at relatively the same speed. And the types of crashes that happen there are different. So there's usually more sideswipe crashes. And that's not to say that somebody can't get on the beltway going the wrong way. These things do happen, and they typically end really bad with some type of head-on collision. But that's not common. That's not a common type of crash. Across all age groups, men have substantially higher crash rates than females. It's usually 50% higher. Um, and if we look at the reasons why, it's men tend to drive faster. They tend to drive a bit more aggressively. They tend to drive impaired uh, more often than not than females. So men actually die at twice the rate as females when it comes to car crashes. So when we look at our driving skills across our lifespan, you can sort of see the age at the bottom and skill across the side. And you'll see that, around 15, 16, where we're learning to drive, our skills slowly start to develop and get better over time. Our skills tend to sort of peak in our early 30s, and then we'll hold on to that until our, early 60s. And as we get older, our skills tend to decline. And then if you look at, once we get to our 80s and 90s, there's a significant drop there in skills, and that's due to a number of factors related to aging. Um, Vision is one. If you can't see, you can't drive, right? Cognitive function, right? Driving is primarily a thinking task, so you have to be able to process information quickly, um, make decisions and execute on those. And there has to be obviously some physical abilities and some physical strength required to maneuver the steering wheel and to apply the brakes and to react in a way that's safe. Everyone, I'm sure, has heard of the term silver tsunami. As our population continues to age, you can sort of see how the trends are looking here. We're at 2026, so between 2020 and 2030 there, you can see that we have a significantly growing population of people in their 70s and 80s. And then obviously, our people over 85 are obviously aging as well. So as people, obviously age, their ability and willingness to want to drive longer is in question too, right? And the question is, how do we do that and plan for that and in a very safe way? Um, Talked about this earlier, so obviously we're still looking at driving risk as it relates to fragility and your ability to sustain the forces of a crash as we get older, and we can see sort of over 85, it gets really bad if you're involved in a crash. All right, so this is just information that I think most folks will find helpful. This is the CDC's chart of top 10 leading causes. I'm looking at the top five here. These are the top five causes of unintentional injury deaths. So when we look at the chart for people over 65, uh, and we look at the number one cause of unintentional deaths, the number one reason is falls, right? People fall, they trip over the dog or the carpet, um, rug or some kind, and they fall, they hit their head, they have some kind of brain bleed, and they never come back from that. Number two is motor vehicle crashes. So, ambulating, walking and moving about and driving is probably something everybody under the sound of my voice does, right? So these are your top two risk, and folks don't often see it that way, especially if you're dealing with a health issue or some kind of disease. You may feel like that's your higher risk, but just sometimes moving about, going up or down some steps is very dangerous for a lot of folks. And if we look at that as a percentage of deaths, falls are taking out 46% of folks in that category. Motor vehicle crashes are taking out about 11%. All right, so let's look at five high-risk driving scenarios for older drivers. So these are five scenarios that older drivers are overrepresented in when it comes to crashes. And I want you to just look and see if you see any kind of trend here. So number one, we have turning left at an intersection with a stop sign that has control where cross traffic does not stop. Number two is turning left across oncoming traffic where a permissive green phase is displayed and you do not have the right of way. So that we'll call that an unprotected left turn, right? You have a green light, but it's not an arrow, so it's up to you to sort of judge time and distance and space between oncoming traffic and go when it's clear. Unprotected left turn. Three, we'll talk about turning right at an intersection controlled by a yield sign, and you're going to merge into traffic that's approaching at 40 to 45 miles per hour. So again, you're turning right. There's a yield sign where you must slow down, be prepared to stop if you must, and then merge within oncoming traffic that's going at least 40 miles per hour. Four is merging onto a limited access highway from a ramp. So sort of say getting on the beltway or getting on any kind of highway with the limited access where you have to sort of get up to speed and then merge into the field of traffic. And then the last one would be changing lanes on the multi-lane roadway with at least four lanes. So if you haven't noticed the trend here, where we're turning left, turning left, turning right, merging and changing lanes, these are all right-of-way errors, right? They're right-of-way errors. It's where you're trying to be somewhere, but you don't have the right of way, and you have to sort of make a decision about when to go, when to slow down, or when to speed up to sort of find your gap um, when you're trying to do these exercises. They're right of way errors. These are four common errors that older drivers tend to make before an intersection crash. One is to not notice potential conflicts in or traffic signs or signals. Um, and that could be for any number of reasons. Two is just sort of misjudging gaps when crossing traffic. Um, Big issue with left turns. Moving or stopping the vehicle too slowly. And then the last one is conducting a poor visual search. Um, Poor visual search. AAA's Foundation for Traffic Safety had published some concerns about driving cessation, what happens when someone stops driving. The research did conclude that it nearly doubles the risk of depression, and and I totally understand that uh, because most folks don't have a plan to stop from driving. And what I've seen in my experience is that something will happen with your driving, and then your family will attempt to intervene. You have a fender bender, in a parking lot, or you have a fender bender at the grocery store, or something happens, and then it draws a lot of attention to the issue, and then people step in and try to help you be safe. And oftentimes that, you know, ends up with, I don't think mom or dad should be driving anymore. And now we go down this road of, well, if you don't drive, how do you get to your doctor's appointments and you're in the grocery store and the library and all the places that you like to go? And those things stop happening, and then depression sets in. There's a 51% risk of reduction in your social network sizes. If you're not able to get out and do the activities and the social engagements that you like to do, yes, your social circle will reduce up to 50% in some cases. Accelerated cognitive decline uh, is another uh, issue that we've seen before. And former drivers are nearly 5 times as likely as current drivers to be admitted in the long-term care facilities. Interesting facts, doesn't obviously apply to everybody. Some people like to plan ahead about the next stage in their life, whether that means moving out of their home into a senior living facility where there's transportation and social activities and other people that can help, provide those things that folks need as they age. Um, Self-regulation is something we talked about earlier. There's basically three types of self-regulation: strategic, tactical, and life goal. Uh, Strategic decisions are essentially decisions that you make before you go out on your trip. So if driving at night is something you're not going to do, you know that I'm not going to drive at night. So if it's dark, I just won't go, or I have to make other arrangements. Um, it could be driving, it could be inclement weather. Some people don't like to drive in the rain or snow, right? Those are decisions that you're going to, if those are the circumstances, you're not going to do it. Tactical are practices that a driver makes while engaged on the road. So if you don't like that left turn at the corner, right, and perhaps you go a different route, or perhaps you make, 3 right turns to avoid the left. But those are decisions that you make while you're out. And then life goal decisions are sort of decisions that affect your life more broadly, and it may, you know, be something where you think about, well, when I leave the house in the suburbs, where do I want to live? What kind of community do I want to be in? Do I want it to be a sort of a more walkable community? Do I want the community to provide transportation services, or maybe even have, doctors on site and therapists on site where I don't have to leave? There are a lot of communities that provide these things all under sort of one roof. So some easy changes to make in your driving habits could be just one, just driving shorter distances, staying on familiar roads, avoiding difficult traffic situations like the unprotected left turns, um, trying to avoid heavy traffic, driving in rush hour, bad weather, driving at night. Those are some of the changes that make driving a little bit less stressful for a lot of drivers. And we see, if anybody's familiar with that, then you sort of are ahead of the game. Um, Alternate transportation options could be, using family and friends. Um, Care partners. My mom has a care partner. She's 86 years old. We live together now. She had to stop driving a few years ago because of her vision. She's still very sharp cognitively, but her vision is really bad. And she trekked out of the house one morning um, around 6 o'clock. She was going to church on a Sunday morning, and nobody even knew she left the house. And she got in the car, and this is after sort of months and months of me trying to counsel her on not driving, and the risk associated with her vision. But she's a very strong-willed person, and she just doesn't like to depend on others to do these things for her, even though she has probably more resources than most people. She left out of here and got in her car and attempted to go to church. And once she got out there, she realized that was a big mistake. But in her ego, she kept pushing. and went on to church and just was a nervous wreck when she got there. And then obviously had to get home and didn't make the call for somebody to come get her and tried to trek back. Um, and it was a very stressful time for her. I think she felt like she ran a red light. She had people honking at her. She was having a hard time maintaining her lane position. It was just a very stressful time. And by the grace of God, she got home in one piece. But when she got home, that she knew instantly that that was it. Like she was like, I can't do this anymore. So, um, so in response to that, through our agency of Seniors Helping Seniors, we found her a good care partner that comes and provides companionship for her, takes her to church on Wednesdays, and they go to shopping and runs her errands. And that's been a good solution for her because one, she has a very difficult time asking people to do things for her, um, which is very frustrating for me because she's done so much for me, and I would love to help her in any way that I can, but her pride just doesn't let her ask for help. So hiring a care partner has been, you know, a significant compromise because she has some skin in the game because she's paying for the care and she doesn't have to burden us with the ask. So, that's a solution that we find a lot works well for a lot of folks. On-demand response services is another Uber or Lyft. If you've never used it, I would suggest you try it um, on short rides just to say you have and just to get familiar with the app because you never know when you might need it. Um, Sometimes people, they think they're going to go to a show or go somewhere and they go out and their car won't start, right? If you only got one car, then you're not going to go to the show. Or you can open the app and call an on-demand car response service. So having done that in the past makes it so much easier to use when the time comes. Plus, those apps need to be set up. You have to have a form of payment already in there, and doing all of that under the stress of I'm going to be late is tough to do. So having either the Uber or the Lyft app already set up and having used it once or twice certainly takes the stress out of using it in a high stress situation where you kind of need to use it right away. Private program services, cars, taxis are still available. Sometimes there's mass or other local transit programs that you can use. Metro Access is one. Um, but I would suggest you start to use these alternative forms of transportation before you need them, right? Get familiar with how they work, what they feel like, the time frames, distances, or all of that that goes into using those programs. You just do it. Do it a few times. That way, if ever you need it, it makes it a lot easier to use when you need it. Assessing driving abilities. As we get older, we know that our body changes. And, while we may feel we're still really good and strong drivers, that's a feeling, right? That's just a feeling that you have. It doesn't mean that it's true. So having an assessment is really a smart way to sort of see where you are in your driving career. And there's a couple of different kinds of assessments. A clinical driving assessment is the highest form of assessment you can have. It's a two-parter. It's a cognitive assessment is the part A, and then the part B is the driving portion of the assessment. Um, those are typically reserved for folks who have significant health concerns, or perhaps maybe you've had a stroke and you want to continue to drive, or maybe you've lost a limb and you need adaptive equipment in your car. Those are done by driving rehabilitation specialists, occupational therapists, and they can sort of help you determine if you should continue to drive, and if so, under what conditions. The professional driving assessment is what I do. That's typically geared for aging, folks that are aging and whose families might have concerns about mom or dad's ability to drive, or if you just wanted to have a checkup and say, look, I just want to see, how I am and where I can improve and just sort of get some honest feedback. And then there are online tools and assessments that you can take, written assessments where you can answer 15 questions and, add your score up and see where you may fall on their chart. Now, if you don't do too well on a written assessment, then they recommend that you move to maybe a professional assessment based on based on your situation. So basically, a driving skills evaluation or a professional driving evaluation really looks for your your strengths and your weaknesses. Um, it's really an observation of driver skills and your ability to drive safely and apply the rules of the road. Um, what I look at when I'm doing evaluations is really your decision making, your hazard recognition, your perception. How do you respond to hazards up, ahead of us, driving through a neighborhood and there's three kids walking, bouncing the ball, and they're walking in the street. If you don't slow down and move over, then essentially you're telling me that you don't see that as a risky situation whereas it's very risky. Three kids bouncing the ball, young kids who are playing and really oblivious to the traffic that's approaching from behind is significantly risky for you and them. But your lack of, you know, changing of speed and position, if you don't do that, then you're essentially saying you really don't see those kids or they're not a risk to you. So those are really what we look at when we're looking at a driver's um, skills and perception and how they make decisions behind the wheel. That ultimately tells me how safe a driver one person is. Some of the components of an evaluation, well, there's a pre-screen questionnaire that we like to sort of walk through to make sure it's the right service for you. Um, there's a cognitive assessment, a mobility assessment, and a vision assessment. And provided you get through particularly the cognitive piece, which is the big piece, then we'll move to the in-car assessment. There's a car fit check. That's a safety program that AAA and AARP sort of partnered with to make sure that people are properly seated in their vehicle for comfort and safety. Then we'll go out and do an in-car evaluation. You'll drive your car to the library, grocery store, doctor, wherever it is you go on a regular basis, and we'll come back and we'll talk about your performance on all of that and provides a debrief with recommendations and next steps in both a verbal and a written way. Some of the considerations for having an evaluation, one, it could be that you're personally concerned that your skills may have diminished, right? Um, Another popular one is that friends or family have suggested that maybe you shouldn't be driving anymore, right? Maybe you've experienced an increase in near misses, minor crashes, or have a bunch of people honking at you all the time, um, right? Maybe you've taken a informal written assessment and didn't do so well, right? Those are just a few of the considerations that I've seen for persons wanting to have an evaluation. Usually, to be honest with you, it's that second bullet that drives most of the activity I see is just, family members are just concerned about a loved one and they're really not sure how to approach it. And oftentimes their approach is very heavy-handed, which could mean like they're taking the keys or disabled or taking the car, um, or disabled the battery, um, or done any number of things that a resourceful senior can find, can order another key and have AAA come out and install a new battery. Those things are short-term. Um, they're short-term solutions that often create a lot of tension in the family. So sometimes bringing in a third party to provide a really objective, perspective on things is a smart way to go. So planning for a driving retirement. 1 in 4 adults now 65 will live to 90. Quarter of adults that are now age 65 will live to at least 90. So, according to the National Institutes of Health, drivers can expect to outlive their ability by 6 to 10 years. 6 years on average for men, 10 years on average uh, for women, because women tend to live longer than men. So if you just think about how old you are now, average life expectancy in the US is 78. So you can just think about where you are on the scale now and just think about, hey, if you're relatively healthy and things are going well and you're probably going to outlive your ability to drive at some point, and you need to sort of plan for that day to come. It's a very difficult conversation to have. Most people, when they're retiring from work, plan sometimes years in advance. I mean, people say, "Oh, I'm going to retire in the next couple of years," and they know that, and they plan for that, and they expect that to happen. The same does not happen with relate to driving. I asked a 92-year-old man a few weeks ago, "Well, how much longer do you plan to drive?" And he said, "Well, as long as I can." Well, there's no plan there. The plan is just to drive up until the end. And the reality, that's just not the reality of the situation. And we certainly want to walk away on our own terms, and we don't want to end it in a vehicle crash where you're hurting yourself or someone else. So it's a decision that takes a lot of self-awareness. You sort of have to really be in tune to your health and sort of your vision and sort of your cognitive function and just how strong you feel and confident you feel behind the wheel, because when things start to happen, and you really don't ignore that, because that's a real thing. It's your body's talking to you. And it's just driving at night. I mean, I'm a relatively you know young person, but even I don't like to drive at night, because for everybody, driving at night is just much more difficult. You just can't see as far, you can't see as clear, and you just need more light to see things clearly, and you don't have it at night. um, it's just one of those things we really have to be honest about. So I talked a little bit about CarFit. It's a free community-based program. It's it's often it's often available at senior centers and senior communities. AARP sort of manages that. So those are listed on their website, and they can be set up for communities that may be interested in having it. Um, they're one-on-one assessments where you go through a 12-point checklist. Um, well, enough about me. Let's just hear about CarFit.
People over the age of 65 are the fastest growing population in the United States. By 2030, more than 70 million Americans will be 65 or older. With age comes natural changes to vision, information processing, flexibility, and the speed of reflexes. And vehicles are changing too, with the addition of more safety features that require adjustment to find the safest fit.
CarFit is a community-based educational program for older drivers focused on safety, comfort, and fit. CarFit was created in 2006, and it was a joint collaboration between AAA, AARP, and the American Occupational Therapy Association.
CarFit is designed to operate successfully in a variety of locations in the community. It's an education program that can be offered in conjunction with AAA or AARP driver safety courses, anywhere that we can establish a place to have a community education event. Or we can have our trained technicians also offer CarFit as a one-to-one education as well. At a CarFit event, a driver pulls up in their own vehicle and they're able to assess their fit. We provide education, we show them how things work, and we provide some community education, some resources that they might find useful. The technicians at CarFit follow a 12-point checklist that guides them through the main safety features in the vehicle, takes 20 minutes, and off they go.
CarFit events are led by volunteer event coordinators who supervise trained CarFit technicians, occupational therapists, or driver rehabilitation specialists. CarFit provides an educational experience. This can prompt a conversation about the steps the driver can take to make him or herself more safe and comfortable in their own vehicle.
The CarFit partners thank all of our volunteers for their service.
CarFit is a really great program. What I see when I'm meeting with folks for evaluations, and I do a one-on-one CarFit, is that usually there's a couple of things that are not usually set right. One is the mirrors, right? When you're seated in your vehicle and you look through your side mirror on your left and on your right, and I ask people, can they see the sides of their car? The answer invariably is yes, right? I can see my car. Well, you shouldn't be able to see your car in your side mirrors. If your mirrors are pulled that far in, then you have a huge blind spot that you're not covering through your mirrors. Um, and usually, the second thing is usually the seat is not properly adjusted. The seat usually needs to sit a little higher um, for better visibility out of the windshield. So, those are just a couple of things that I tend to always need to make adjustments on. And folks like to see the size of their car as what they refer to as a reference point. Well, you don't really need to see the sides of your car because your car is not going to hit you, right? You want to push your mirrors out so that you can't see your car, so that you can see the other vehicles that are around you, which is your greater risk. So CarFit's it's a really good program, and obviously we like to recommend it because it does help seniors with the adjustments that are very important. All right, seniors and falls. We talked a little bit about falls earlier and how it's the number one cause of unintentional death for people over 65. Now let's look at how falls impact driving. So seniors and falls, we obviously know that it significantly increased the risk of subsequent crashes. The research has shown that you're 40% more likely to experience a crash than older adults who have not fallen. So if you start falling, that is a major red flag. There's a direct correlation between falls and crash risk. So just know that. And and especially if you can't explain the fall, right? If the dog, you trip over the dog, or something comes, into your path, that's a different thing. But when you start falling and you really can't explain why you fell, that's a real concern. So just sort of be mindful of that. And then we'll look at the way that falls impact driving. There's three significant ways. One is obviously it can cause some physical changes. Two, it can indirectly lead to reduced functional ability. And then the last one, it's going to heighten your self-awareness of age-related changes. And then what that leads to is what we call the downward cycle of fear. So it starts with a person that falls or trips, and then that in turn develops a fear of falling. And then that fear results in a reduction or a limitation in your activities. And then that reduction in your activities leads to reduced mobility. And then your reduced mobility leads to decreased strength, endurance, and balance. And it leads right back to an increased risk of falling. So, if you do fall or you do trip or you have, a balance issue or there's something that's happening, don't let fear take over, right? Start doing your exercises, which you should be doing anyway. Seek therapy, but you can't sit still. You can't let fear take over because that reduced activity is going to hurt you more than it helps you. So I encourage you to continue to stay active. So let's talk about a few resources. From ones that I like is AAA's flexibility fitness training for better driving. There's exercises designed to help improve flexibility as it relates to driving. This is an online, they used to print this, but they stopped printing it years back. But it is online as a PDF, and I'll send a link that can get you access to this, but you can Google it as well. Self-rating tool. It's another AAA traffic safety resource. It's a booklet that offers 15 questions as well as some other information that'll help you assess your driving. You answer the questions, calculate your score, and then receive information about your driving performance. If you don't do well on that, perhaps you should look into another type of assessment. But the self-rating tool by AAA is a great resource. Driving agreements doesn't really apply here. This is when folks are sort of making plans with families to drive under certain circumstances based on sort of health conditions. Um, My Mobility Plan, the CDC, has great resources both in English and Spanish here. I like this because it's a booklet that allows you to work through, answer questions, um, sort of chart out how things are happening now. You know, how are you getting to church? How are you getting to the store? How are you getting your appointments? And then what your options or alternatives could be moving forward. That's a great resource. And then AAA also has a senior transportation mobility planner. Um, all are really good resources to help sort of lay the foundation about, hey, you know, if you live long enough, your ability to drive is gonna move away from you at some point, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to still stay active and independent. It just means it's going to look different. That's really what it means. It just means instead of you driving, you're going to be chauffeured, right? Instead of you doing it, someone's going to take you. And you have to really be okay with that. It's just a part of life, and you sort of have to sort of really be self-aware about, because safety is the driver of all of this. It's just you don't want to end your driving career by crashing your car and then having all of your assets at risk, the liability that goes with the car crash, the lawsuits that could come as a result. That's not a way you want to end your driving career. Trust me on that. Couple of other resources are our defensive driving refresher courses. AAA has one called Roadwise Driver, which is really geared toward older drivers. It really speaks to issues related just to senior driving population, which is very different than those of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. You may be familiar with that, or you may be familiar with AARP's Senior Driver Program. Both of those programs are available online. I know AAA, I think they sunset their classroom program during COVID, but I'm not sure about AARP. But they're both good courses. I tend to like the AAA course just because my background with AAA, and I know we have our resources in traffic safety are just top notch. So these are courses that back you up with state laws and driving tips and changes in the driving industry. So some of these courses, based on where you live, may offer you a multi-year insurance discount. So yeah, Virginia does have a mandated insurance premium discount if you completed the course.
Kurt, just so you know, we're just under 10 minutes to 11.
Yep, I'm about to wrap up. We'll skip that. So these are some warning signs of unsafe driving behavior. This is just a few things that we see, and NHTSA has a whole list of these warning signs. So if you see any of these unsafe driving behaviors, or you're experiencing any, that could be a red flag. Driving slower than posted speed limit, difficulty reacting to multiple stimuli, braking or stopping abruptly without cause. These are just some warning signs, and that list will be included in the resources I provide as well. And then we'll end with this.
Americans are holding onto their driver's licenses longer than ever before. 91% of Americans over the age of 65 still drive, and 67% of people 85 and over still have their keys. Giving up driving is a big loss of independence, and coming to that decision can be tricky. In tonight's Eye on America, CBS's James Brown shows us how one family navigated that very conversation.
The first time Voncell Gray got behind the wheel of a car, Dwight Eisenhower was president.
Always good to get out. The weather was good.
But despite a clean record over the decades that followed, not one accident, the 85-year-old knew 3 years ago her driving days were over.
I drove to church one morning. I was a nervous wreck.
Because?
I think I ran a red light. And once I got home, I said no more.
What do you miss the most about driving?
Not being able to go when I want to go.
Voncell is one of millions of older Americans grappling with that sudden loss of independence.
She's got a lot more living to do, but like a lot of people, she just didn't have a lot more driving to do.
For Kurt Gray, who has spent his entire career cultivating safe drivers, Voncell's decision was personal. Kurt is Voncell's son.
One of my specialties is a senior driving evaluation where I look at a person's cognitive function, their mobility, their vision, and then we'll go out and see how safe they are behind the wheel of a car.
Gray worked for AAA for 29 years and now owns a traffic safety consulting firm. He helps families navigate the difficult conversation of when a loved one should stop driving.
They don't engage their parents early enough in the conversation.
And a conversation might be like what?
Conversation is, hey, Mom or Dad, I'm seeing these dents and dings on your car. Maybe we should look at other modes of transportation.
By 2030, an estimated 71 million people in the U.S. will be 65 and older. That's 21% of the population.
Given the aging of the society, we are headed for a major mobility gap.
Joseph Coughlin runs the Age Lab at MIT, where he studies how transportation and technology can improve the lives of older people.
We're not testing older drivers. Instead, we look at how are new technologies behind the wheel either helping or distracting. So you want to go for a ride?
Can I fit?
I think you can.
To do that, Coughlin and his team have designed this simulator. Sensors track heart rate, eye movements, and stress levels as a driver encounters simulated distractions. Coughlin then provides data to automakers.
We're helping car companies rethink how they design the vehicle.
No amount of technology will be able to guarantee safety for some aging drivers, which is why Voncell Gray knew it was time to put down the keys and rely on hitching rides from family and friends. 3 years out of the driving game, how do you feel now?
I think it was one of the best decisions I've made in my old age.
Now she can enjoy her retirement in the passenger seat. For Eye on America, I'm James Brown in suburban Maryland.
All right, this presentation was brought to you, well, in part by Seniors Helping Seniors, where we support seniors through our peer-to-peer model. Thank you very much for your time. And Gary, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take those now.
Well, I don't see much in the way of questions. Number of comments. One of them, that cars are built differently than they used to be. They're taller so that she can't see the lines on the road as well, and the turning angles are different than what she's used to. So are there things people can do? You talked about raising your seat to improve your visibility. What else could people do to adapt to the way cars are built today?
Yeah, sometimes the seat is, the seat adjustment will do the trick. But if a person is really short in stature, they may need a seat cushion that can help elevate them. You want to be able to see at least 3 inches above the top of your steering wheel, looking out the center of your windshield. So if you don't have that, then yeah, you're going to be at a slight disadvantage. So, and also your steering wheel on new cars both telescopes in, out, and up and down. A lot of folks don't know that, but there's a lock usually underneath the steering wheel. If you push that down, you can get some adjustments made to your steering wheel too.
All right. We do have a question about self-driving cars. Is that something you see coming down the road relatively soon, or what are you seeing? What are your expectations?
No, it's not relatively soon. We're not built for self-driving cars yet. We don't have the infrastructure. There's still a lot of testing to be done. It's certainly something, a wave of the future, but not, I don't think, for my generation.
Okay. And we just got a number of comments on the way people drive. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one on the road using my turn signals. Everyone should slow down and pay attention. Distracted driving does not always mean you're using a phone. There are all kinds of other distractions.
That's right. The
Stopping.
phone is just a tool, and what the research has shown is not the phone that's the problem, it's the conversation. So even conversing with someone, a passenger, or having kids in the back, and if you're engaged in a conversation, you're asking your brain to focus on two different things. And it's the conversation that's distraction. It's not the phone. Most states have hands-free law, so you don't have the phone in your hand. It's either in the cushion or, in a holder somewhere, but it's the conversation that's really distracting from your ability to focus 100% on driving.
Yeah, I've read what you just said, that a hands-free phone is just as distracting as if you're holding it up to your ear, because your brain is at the other end of the conversation,
Correct.
not facing ahead of you.
Correct.
And I think that's what we've got. Number of people complimenting you on an excellent presentation. I think we've all gotten a lot out of it and
Good. Thank you.
have a lot to think about going forward.
Yeah.
And it's 11:01, so I'm going to stop recording.